I stood in the courthouse hallway, my phone buzzing with notifications. I couldn't bring myself to read when my father's lawyer handed me the eviction notice. My own childhood home, the ranch my mother had built with her bare hands and inherited fortune. I had 72 hours to remove my belongings from Elysian Fields, or everything I owned would be considered abandoned property. The paper shook in my trembling fingers as I read the signature at the bottom. Donovan Blackwood, my father, the man who was supposed to protect me, had just made me homeless 3 weeks after burying my mother. But before I tell you how I fought back and won, if you're enjoying this story of justice and revenge, please hit that like button and subscribe. Your support means everything, and I promise you this story gets so much better. Drop a comment below telling me what you would have done in my situation. Now let me take you back to where this nightmare truly began. The day of my mother's funeral was unseasonably warm for March in Kentucky. Eleanor Sterling had been the kind of woman who commanded attention without ever raising her voice, who built an empire in the horse breeding industry through sheer determination and an innate understanding of bloodlines that bordered on mystical. She had turned a modest inheritance into Elysian Fields, a $5 billion estate that produced some of the finest thoroughbreds in racing history. And she had loved my father, Donovan Blackwood, with a fierce loyalty that I now realize he never deserved. I should have known something was wrong when I arrived at the estate that morning and saw Sienna Royce's Mercedes parked in my mother's spot. Sienna was my father's executive assistant, a position she had held for 5 years, though I had always suspected her duties extended far beyond scheduling meetings and answering emails. She was 32, 15 years younger than my father, with the kind of calculated beauty that came from expensive procedures and designer everything. My mother had been sick for 8 months fighting pancreatic cancer, with the same determination she brought to everything else, and during those months Sienna had become a permanent fixture in our home. The funeral was held on the grounds of Elysian Fields in the garden. My mother had planted herself filled with heritage roses and flowering dogwoods. Over 500 people attended. Industry leaders, celebrities who owned horses. My mother had bred politicians she had supported, and countless employees whose lives she had touched. The media lined the perimeter, their cameras creating a constant backdrop of clicks and flashes. I wore the navy dress my mother had picked out for me just 2 months earlier, when she still had the strength to care about such things, when we both pretended she might live to see me wear it to some happier occasion. I stood beside my father during the service, feeling his rigid presence like a wall of ice. He didn't cry, he didn't tremble. He delivered his eulogy with the practiced ease of a corporate presentation, talking about my mother's business acumen and her contribution to the industry, but never mentioning how she laughed at terrible jokes or how she snuck sugar cubes to the horses when she thought no one was looking. Sienna stood on his other side, close enough that their shoulders touched, wearing a black Chanel dress that hugged every curve and a diamond necklace I recognized immediately. It had belonged to my mother, a family heirloom from the Sterling line, something she had promised would be mine one day. After the burial, as guests began to filter toward the main house for the reception, my father did something that made my blood run cold. He stepped up to the microphone that had been set up for the service, his voice carrying across the garden with an authority that demanded attention. Everyone stopped moving. The cameras swiveled toward him. This is what he said. I will never forget a single word. To honor Eleanor's legacy and her wish for me to find happiness again, I am announcing today that I am donating Elysian Fields in its entirety to someone who has brought light back into my life during these dark months. Sienna Royce has been my rock, my support, and my future. This estate which Eleanor built will continue under Sienna's loving stewardship. He pulled out a leather portfolio, alligator skin, obscenely expensive, and handed it to Sienna with a smile I had never seen him give my mother. The crowd murmured a sound like angry bees. I felt the ground tilt beneath my feet. Sienna pressed her hand to her chest, her eyes wide with what I'm sure she meant to look like shocked gratitude, though I could see the gleam of triumph beneath her performance. Oh, Donovan, she breathed into the microphone. I don't know what to say. Let me help you, I heard myself saying, my voice cutting through the garden like a knife. The words came from somewhere deep and furious, a place I didn't know existed inside me until that moment. I stepped forward, moving past my father, my eyes locked on Sienna. How about you start with thank you for letting me steal from a dead woman before her body is even cold? The silence that followed was absolute. I could hear a horse whinnying in the distance, could hear the click of camera shutters going wild. My father's face went purple with rage. Ava, he hissed, not here, not now. I turned to face him, this man who had raised me, who had taught me to ride when I was 4, who had once been someone I looked up to. When then, Dad? When would be a good time to talk about how you're giving away Mom's legacy to your mistress at her own funeral? Should I have made an appointment? Sienna's mask of sympathy slipped for just a moment, revealing something cold and calculating underneath. She leaned close as I walked past her words meant only for me. Be careful, little girl. You don't want to make enemies before you know what's left for you to inherit. I walked away from that funeral and drove to my apartment in Louisville, a place I had kept during college, and never given up some instinct telling me I might need a bolt hole. That instinct proved prophetic. Over the next 3 days, I watched in mounting horror as my father and Sienna began systematically erasing my mother from Elysian Fields. The rose garden, which my mother had tended personally for 20 years, was torn up and replaced with a modern sculpture installation. Her portrait in the main hall, a beautiful oil painting commissioned for their 20th anniversary, was replaced with an enormous gold-framed mirror. The estate's historic iron gates were removed, and new ones installed with a custom design reading Blackwood Royce Manor in flowing script. Each change was documented by the media Sienna had invited in for an exclusive behind-the-scenes look at the transformation. She gave interviews about her vision for modernizing the estate, never once mentioning my mother's name. I watched these segments from my apartment, feeling something inside me calcify into pure determination. They were trying to erase Eleanor Sterling from her own creation, and I was apparently too insignificant to even consider a threat. On the 4th day after the funeral, I received an unexpected visitor. Caleb Morrison had been the estate manager at Elysian Fields for 30 years, starting as a stable hand when my mother first bought the property. He was 70 now, with hands gnarled from decades of physical labor and eyes that missed nothing. He had been like a grandfather to me growing up, teaching me everything my mother hadn't about running a horse farm. He came to my apartment at dawn, looking over his shoulder like he was afraid of being followed. "Miss Ava," he said, pressing a small object wrapped in cloth into my hands. "Your mother gave me this 2 months ago. She said if anything happened to her, I was to give it to you and only you. She said you would know what to do with it." I unwrapped the cloth and found a tarnished silver horseshoe, small enough to fit in my palm. It was from Windchaser, my mother's first champion stallion, the horse that had established Elysian Fields as a serious player in the racing world. My mother had kept it on her desk in the workshop, a private studio she had built behind the main stables where she did her planning and kept her most important records. I had spent countless hours there as a child, watching her work, learning the business that was supposed to be my inheritance. "What am I supposed to do with this?" I asked Caleb, turning the horseshoe over in my hands. Feeling the weight of it, the way it had been worn smooth by my mother's constant handling, Caleb's eyes crinkled with something that might have been a smile. "Your mother said you were smart enough to figure it out. She also said to tell you that men like your father build empires on sand, but the Sterling women build legacies in stone. She said his greed would be your weapon if you were brave enough to use it." He left before I could ask what he meant, disappearing into the early morning mist, like a ghost bearing cryptic messages. I sat at my kitchen table holding that horseshoe, trying to think like my mother. She had been a master strategist, someone who planned 10 moves ahead in both business and life. If she had left me this specific object, there was a reason. The workshop, it had to be the workshop. Can't. I waited until nightfall until I knew my father and Sienna would be at some charity gala they had very publicly announced they would attend together. I drove back to Elysian Fields, using the service entrance, a route I had taken 1,000 times growing up. Security had always been tight, but I knew every camera angle, every blind spot. Caleb had taught me the patrol routes when I was a teenager, sneaking out to meet friends. That knowledge served me well now, as I made my way to the workshop, my heart pounding so hard I thought it might crack my ribs. The workshop looked abandoned. No one had entered it since my mother's death, and a thin layer of dust covered everything. I stood in the center of the room, looking around at the shelves of breeding records, the wall of photographs documenting every major win, the desk where my mother had sat and built her empire. The fireplace was cold and dark, one of those old stone affairs that probably dated back to when the building had been a farrier's forge a century ago. I approached it slowly, holding the horseshoe like a talisman. The stonework was beautiful, fitted together with such precision that the seams were barely visible. I ran my fingers over the surface, searching until I found it. A small indentation in the stone, shaped exactly like the horseshoe in my hand. My mother had carved this herself probably years ago, planning for a day she hoped would never come. I pressed the horseshoe into the indentation and heard a click that sounded impossibly loud in the silent room. A section of the stone facade swung inward, revealing a small safe built into the wall itself. Inside was a metal box, and inside that box was my mother's real legacy. There was a USB drive in a clear case. A letter in my mother's handwriting, the ink slightly smudged as if she had cried while writing it. And most importantly, a legal document with an official seal. Irrevocable trust agreement, it read across the top. Sterling Legacy Trust. I sat on the floor of the workshop and read my mother's letter by the light of my phone, tears streaming down my face. My darling Ava, if you are reading this, then Donovan has done something I desperately hoped he would not. I wanted to believe until my last breath that the man I married still existed somewhere beneath the ambition and the coldness that has consumed him these past years. But I am not a fool, and I know my husband better than he knows himself. His need for control and his weakness for flattery have always been his greatest flaws. I suspect that woman Sienna has used both against him. You must understand something, my love. Elysian Fields was never Donovan's to give away. The land, the horses, the buildings, all of it came from sterling money. My grandmother's trust, carefully managed and grown over generations. When I married your father, I was young and in love, but I was not stupid. My grandmother taught me that. The estate was placed in an irrevocable trust before our marriage. Donovan has been the face of Elysian Fields, yes. He has helped build it, certainly. But he has never owned it. The trust owns it, and the trust has terms that I wrote myself. Terms that my lawyers assured me would stand up in any court. If Donovan attempts to sell, transfer, or gift any part of Elysian Fields to anyone other than you, my direct descendant, the betrayal clause activates. Everything reverts to you immediately. No contest, no debate, no loopholes. I never told him about this because I wanted to trust him. I wanted to believe our marriage meant more than money and power. But I am dying, and I see clearly now what I refused to see before. Sienna Royce has been his mistress for 3 years. I have known. I have documentation. It is all on that USB drive, along with other information about your father's business practices that you may need. He has been using Blackwood Industries funds to support his affair, buying her cars and jewelry, and paying for her apartment in Louisville. He has been making questionable deals, taking risks with other people's money. Marcus Thorne, his CFO, has been helping him hide it all. Use these weapons wisely, Ava. I do not tell you this to make you bitter or vengeful. I tell you this so that you can protect what should be yours, what I built for you. Your father may try to paint you as unstable or greedy. He may try to manipulate the narrative and turn people against you. But you have the truth, and you have the law on your side. Most importantly, you have the strength of the sterling women in your blood. We do not crumble. We do not surrender. We build legacies that outlast those who doubt us. I love you, my darling girl, more than I have ever loved anything. I am so sorry I will not be there to see you claim your inheritance, but I know you will make me proud. Be brave, be smart, be ruthless when you need to be, and compassionate when you can be. And remember that the best revenge is not destruction, but creation. Build something beautiful from the ashes he will try to leave you. All my love forever and always, Mom. I must have sat there for an hour reading that letter over and over, crying and laughing and feeling something fierce and powerful unfurling inside my chest. My mother had planned for this. She had known my father might betray everything they had built together, and she had protected me. She had given me the weapons I would need to fight back. The next morning, I called Catherine Davenport, the attorney whose name was listed on the trust documents. She was a senior partner at one of Louisville's oldest and most respected law firms, and she remembered my mother fondly. We met that afternoon in her corner office overlooking the Ohio River, and I watched her face as she reviewed the documents I had found. "This is ironclad," she said finally, looking up at me with something like admiration in her eyes. "Your mother was incredibly thorough. The trust owns 80% of Elysian Fields. Your father has operational control as the surviving spouse, but he cannot transfer ownership. The moment he signed those papers giving the estate to Ms. Royce, he triggered the betrayal clause. Legally, Ava, you are now the sole owner of Elysian Fields." I felt dizzy with relief and terror in equal measure. What do I do now? Ms. Davenport smiled, and it was not a kind smile. Now we go to war. The next 48 hours moved with the speed and precision of a military campaign. Ms. Davenport filed an emergency petition with the court, to enforce the trust terms and remove Donovan Blackwood from any operational control of the estate. She also filed a separate lawsuit against both my father and Sienna for attempted theft and fraud. The filings were made public record, and within hours, the media that had been so enchanted with Sienna's makeover story had a new, far more interesting narrative. But my father did not become a successful CEO by being slow or unprepared. He and Marcus Thorne, his CFO, and apparently his partner in all kinds of questionable activities, counterattacked immediately. They filed their own petition claiming that I was mentally unstable following my mother's death, that I was making wild accusations based on grief and confusion, and that I needed a guardian appointed to manage my affairs. They had a psychologist ready to testify that sudden bereavement could cause delusional thinking. They had witnesses prepared to say I had always been emotional and impulsive. They also went to the press with a carefully crafted story: Donovan Blackwood, grieving widower, forced to take legal action to protect his troubled daughter from herself. Poor Ava, overcome with loss, lashing out at the people trying to help her. It was a masterclass in manipulation, and I watched in horror as public opinion began to shift. Social media lit up with people taking sides, most of them siding with my father because he controlled the narrative and had decades of goodwill built up in the community. I was alone in my apartment watching my character get assassinated on live television when Caleb called me. "They are locking down the estate," he said, his voice urgent. "Security has new orders. You are not allowed on the property. They are saying you are a threat." I felt something inside me break and then reform into something harder, sharper. "Good," I said. "Let them think I am beaten. Let them think they have won." I called Miss Davenport and told her I wanted to go on the offensive. "I am tired of defending myself," I said. "I want to attack." She was quiet for a moment, and then she said, "There is a reporter I know, Jessica Riley. She does investigative journalism for the Louisville Courier. She is very good at her job, and she does not like powerful men who abuse their positions. If we give her the story, really give it to her with all the documentation your mother left, she will run with it. But once we do this, Ava, there is no going back. This will be public and ugly and permanent." I thought about my mother, about the years she had spent building something beautiful and meaningful. I thought about how my father had stood at her funeral and given it all away to his mistress without a moment's hesitation. I thought about the rose garden torn up and replaced with cold metal sculptures. "Do it," I said. Jessica Riley was younger than I expected, maybe 35, with sharp eyes and a no-nonsense demeanor that immediately put me at ease. We met in a coffee shop far from Louisville, in a small town where no one would recognize either of us. I brought copies of everything: the trust documents, my mother's letter, the USB drive with its explosive contents, financial records showing years of embezzlement, photographs of jewelry and cars purchased with company funds, hotel receipts and private investigator reports documenting the affair, text messages between my father and Sienna that would make anyone's stomach turn. "This is Pulitzer-level material," Jessica said, quietly, after reviewing everything for over 2 hours. "But I need to ask you something, Ava. What do you want from this revenge justice? What is your endgame?" "I want my mother's legacy protected," I said. "I want the truth to be known, and I want my father and that woman to face consequences for what they have done. Not just to me, but to every employee at Blackwood Industries who trusted them, to every investor who believed in them, to my mother's memory." Jessica nodded slowly. "Then I will help you. But you need to be prepared for what comes next. Your life is going to become very public very quickly. Every mistake you have ever made will be examined. People will say terrible things about you. Your father will fight back hard. Can you handle that?" I thought about my mother's letter, about her words telling me to be brave and ruthless and strong. "I can handle it," I said, "because I know I am right." The story broke on a Thursday morning 3 weeks after my mother's funeral. The headline read, "Blackwood Industries CEO under investigation for fraud, embezzlement, and breach of fiduciary duty." It was the lead story on every news site, trending on every social media platform. Jessica had done her job beautifully, laying out the facts with devastating clarity. The affair, the embezzlement, the illegal use of company funds, the hidden trust that made my father's grand gesture at the funeral not just tasteless, but fraudulent. She had gotten statements from former employees, from competitors, from people my father had stepped on during his climb to power. She had built a case not just against his character, but against his entire career. The stock price of Blackwood Industries dropped 30% in the first hour of trading. By noon, the board of directors had called an emergency meeting. By 5 p.m., both Donovan Blackwood and Marcus Thorne had been placed on administrative leave pending a full investigation. The SEC announced they would be opening their own inquiry into the company's financial practices. I watched it all unfold from Ms. Davenport's office, feeling strangely numb. "Is this real?" I kept asking. "Is this actually happening?" "It is real," she assured me. "And it is only the beginning." Our court date was set for 2 weeks later, expedited because of the public interest and the emergency nature of the trust violation. Those 2 weeks were the longest of my life. My father's lawyers tried everything. They claimed the trust was invalid. They claimed my mother had been mentally incompetent when she created it. They claimed I had forged the documents. They sent private investigators to dig into every aspect of my life, looking for anything they could use against me. They found old college photos of me at parties, found ex-boyfriends willing to say I had been dramatic or emotional, found professors willing to say I had been an average student, not brilliant like my mother. "None of it mattered," Ms. Davenport kept telling me. "None of it changes the legal facts. The trust is valid. Your father broke its terms. Everything else is just noise." But the noise was deafening. I stopped reading social media. I stopped watching the news. I focused on one thing, only preparing my testimony for court. Ms. Davenport drilled me for hours every day, preparing me for every possible question, every attack the other side might launch. She taught me to stay calm, to stick to the facts, to never let them see me lose control. Sienna, meanwhile, had gone completely silent. She had deleted all her social media accounts. She had stopped giving interviews. According to sources Jessica Riley had at Elysian Fields, she was still living there, but she never left the main house. The transformation project had stopped completely. It was like she had realized too late what she had actually gotten herself into. The courtroom was packed on the morning of our hearing. Every major news outlet had sent reporters. The gallery was filled with people I recognized from the industry, from my mother's funeral, from my childhood. I wore a simple navy suit, no jewelry, except my mother's pearl earrings. I wanted to look serious and credible, not like the unstable party girl my father's lawyers had tried to paint me as. My father sat at the defense table with 3 attorneys, all of them in suits that probably cost more than most people's cars. He looked older than he had at the funeral, the stress showing in new lines around his eyes and mouth. He would not look at me. Sienna was not there. Her lawyers had gotten her excused from appearing, claiming she was just an innocent bystander caught up in a family dispute. The judge was a woman in her 60s named Patricia Morrison, with a reputation for not tolerating nonsense in her courtroom. She listened to the opening arguments from both sides with no expression on her face, occasionally making notes on a legal pad. My father's lawyers argued that the trust was a relic from an earlier era, that it did not reflect my mother's true final wishes, that it was being weaponized by a bitter daughter against a grieving father. They painted my father as a victim of my manipulation and my mother's paranoia. Then it was our turn, and Ms. Davenport stood up with the confidence of someone who knew she had already won. She presented the trust document, certified and notarized, with its crystal-clear terms. She presented the deed transfer my father had signed at the funeral, which directly violated those terms. She presented the financial records showing the embezzlement and the affair. And then, as her final piece of evidence, she played a video that I had not known existed. My mother had recorded it 2 months before she died, sitting in her workshop, looking directly into the camera with the clarity and strength that had defined her entire life. She looked thin and tired, the cancer eating away at her, but her voice was steady and sure. "My name is Eleanor Sterling Blackwood," she said into the camera. "I am recording this on January 15th, 2024. I am of sound mind and body, as much as the cancer allows, and I am making this statement voluntarily and without coercion. I want it to be clear, for the record, and for any legal proceeding that may follow my death, that the Sterling Legacy Trust represents my true and final wishes for Elysian Fields. The estate was built with Sterling family money. It was grown through my work and my decisions. My husband, Donovan Blackwood, has been a partner in this endeavor, and I have valued his contributions. But he does not own Elysian Fields, has never owned it, and never will own it. If he attempts to give away or sell what is not his, it is because he has allowed greed and ego to overcome his judgment. The trust exists to protect my daughter, Ava Sterling, from exactly that kind of betrayal." She paused, and I saw her eyes fill with tears that she did not let fall. "To Donovan, if you are watching this in a courtroom, it means you have broken every promise you ever made to me. It means you valued control and pride more than our daughter's future. It means the man I fell in love with is truly gone, replaced by someone I do not recognize. I am sorry for that. I grieve for the loss of who you used to be, but I will not let your weakness destroy what I built. Elysian Fields belongs to Ava. It always has. The trust ensures it always will. The courtroom was silent when the video ended. I was crying openly, not caring anymore about looking strong or credible. That was my mother, alive and vibrant, even in the shadow of death, protecting me one last time. I saw several people in the gallery wiping their eyes. Even Judge Morrison looked moved, though she kept her professional composure. The judge did not even need to deliberate. She reviewed the trust document one final time, reviewed the deed transfer my father had signed, and looked up at both legal teams. The law here is unambiguous, she said. The Sterling Legacy Trust is valid, properly executed, and enforceable. Mr. Blackwood's attempt to transfer ownership of Elysian Fields to Ms. Royce was in direct violation of the Trust's Betrayal Clause. Therefore, I am ordering immediate and complete transfer of all ownership rights in Elysian Fields to Ava Sterling, effective as of this moment. Furthermore, I am granting Ms. Sterling's request to have Donovan Blackwood and Sienna Royce removed from the property within 72 hours. She looked directly at my father for the first time. Mr. Blackwood, I am deeply disturbed by the evidence presented here today. Your actions at your late wife's funeral were not just legally problematic, but morally reprehensible. I hope you take some time to reflect on what you have lost through your own choices. I looked across the courtroom at Jessica Riley and gave her the signal we had arranged. She nodded and immediately stepped outside to make a phone call. Within minutes, her full investigative piece went live on the Courier's website. Not just the financial crimes, not just the affair, but everything. The full scope of my father's corruption, the depth of his betrayal, the systematic way he and Marcus Thorne had been looting Blackwood Industries for years. My father and his lawyers walked out of the courtroom into a firestorm of camera flashes and shouted questions. I watched from inside as he tried to push through the crowd, his face a mask of fury and humiliation. His phone was ringing constantly, and I could imagine what those calls were about. The board members demanding answers, major investors pulling their support, business partners cutting ties to avoid being dragged down with him. By the end of that day, Blackwood Industries had suspended both my father and Marcus Thorne without pay. The SEC had expanded their investigation. 3 major clients had terminated their contracts. The company's stock price had dropped another 40%, wiping out billions in market value. But the most satisfying moment came that evening when Sienna Royce called a press conference outside Elysian Fields. She stood there in front of the gates, the ones she had changed to read Blackwood Royce Manor, and she announced that she was heartbroken by Donovan's deception, that she had been manipulated and lied to, that she had no idea about any of the illegal activities or the trust violations. I was a victim in all of this, she said, her voice shaking with what I am sure she thought was convincing emotion. Donovan made me believe we had a future together. He told me Eleanor had wanted him to be happy. I trusted him. I loved him. Then someone in the crowd of reporters shouted a question. If you loved him, why did you just sell the exclusive rights to your story to 3 different magazines? Why did you hire a crisis management PR firm this morning? Sienna's mask slipped completely. She looked directly at the camera, and for just a moment I saw the real her. Cold, calculating, furious that her plan had fallen apart. Then she turned and walked back through the gates without another word. The next day she was gone. She packed up everything, including the jewelry she had stolen from my mother, and disappeared. I heard later that she had moved to New York and was trying to rebrand herself as some kind of lifestyle influencer selling a story about surviving a toxic relationship. 2 days after the court ruling, I returned to Elysian Fields with Caleb. The security guards, the ones my father had hired to keep me out, were gone. The gates, still bearing that ridiculous Blackwood Royce Manor inscription, were standing open. We drove up the long driveway past the paddocks where horses grazed in the spring sunshine, past the destroyed rose garden, all the way to the main house. I stood in the entryway in front of that enormous mirror Sienna had installed to replace my mother's portrait, and I made a decision. Everything she had done would be undone. Every change, every alteration, every attempt to erase Eleanor Sterling from her own creation would be reversed. The rose garden would be replanted. The portrait would be restored to its place of honor. The gates would be changed back. And the name Elysian Fields would be reclaimed. But more than that, I decided the estate would become what my mother had always dreamed it could be. Not just a business, but a legacy. A place that meant something beyond profit margins and championship trophies. Over the next 6 months, I transformed Elysian Fields into something my mother would have been proud of. We established the Eleanor Sterling Foundation, a nonprofit dedicated to equine therapy for children with trauma and disabilities. We opened the grounds to school groups for educational programs about horse breeding and farm management. We hired back every single employee my father and Sienna had fired during their brief reign of terror. We replanted the rose garden, and this time we opened it to the public 1 day a week, with all proceeds going to cancer research. The business side continued to thrive. Our horses still won races. Our breeding programs still produced champions. But now it meant something more than just winning and profit. It was a legacy just like my mother had always intended. My father, meanwhile, faced the consequences of his actions. The SEC investigation resulted in criminal charges for securities fraud and embezzlement. Marcus Thorne offered a plea deal in exchange for testimony, turned on my father, completely providing evidence of every crime they had committed together. Donovan Blackwood, the man who had built an empire on charm and ruthlessness, was convicted on 14 counts and sentenced to 8 years in federal prison. I only saw him once more before he began his sentence. He came to Elysian Fields on a gray October afternoon, looking decades older than he actually was. He was not allowed on the property without my permission, so he stood outside the gates, the ones that once again read Elysian Fields, in the original iron script my mother had chosen 30 years ago. I walked down to meet him, not because I wanted to, but because I knew I needed to face him one final time. We stood on opposite sides of the gate, a barrier between us that felt more metaphorical than physical. "You won," he said finally, his voice flat and defeated. I did not win. I told him, and I meant it. Mom's legacy won. The truth won. Justice won. But this was never about winning or losing for me, Dad. This was about protecting something beautiful that you tried to destroy out of selfishness and ego. He looked at me with something that might have been regret, or might have just been self-pity. "I did love your mother, you know, in my own way." "I know you did," I said, and I felt a wave of sadness for what might have been for the father I used to have before he let greed and pride consume him. "But you did not love her enough to honor her. You did not love her enough to resist betraying everything she built. And you did not love me enough to think about what your actions would do to your own daughter. So yes, maybe you loved her in your way, but your way was not good enough." He had nothing to say to that. He turned and walked back to the car that was waiting for him, and I watched him drive away from Elysian Fields for the last time. I felt no triumph in that moment, no satisfaction. Just a quiet, sad certainty that this was how it had to end. The estate is mine now, fully and completely. We changed the name legally to Sterling Legacy Farms, honoring my mother and the family that built everything from nothing. The main house has been partially converted into offices for the foundation. My mother's portrait hangs in the entrance hall where it belongs. The rose garden blooms every spring and summer, open to anyone who wants to walk through it and find a moment of peace. I have built a life here that I never imagined I would have. Some days I still expect to see my mother in the workshop or hear her voice calling to me from the stables. But mostly I feel her presence in every corner of this place, in every decision I make and every person we help through the foundation. This is her legacy, and I am its guardian. It has been a 1.5 years since my mother died, since that terrible day at her funeral, when I thought I had lost everything. But what I actually lost was only the illusion of family, the false belief that blood and marriage automatically mean loyalty and love. What I gained was so much more valuable. I gained the truth. I gained my independence. I gained the knowledge that I am stronger than I ever believed possible. There are still hard days. Days when I wake up angry at my father for throwing away decades of his life for pride, and a woman who abandoned him the moment things got difficult. Days when I miss my mother so fiercely that I can barely breathe. Days when the weight of running a $5 billion estate and a growing foundation feels overwhelming. But those days are becoming fewer and farther between. I have learned to set boundaries that I never knew I needed. I have learned that saying no is not selfish, it is self-preservation. I have learned that people will take as much as you allow them to take, and that the only way to stop being used is to stop offering yourself up as a resource to be exploited. I have learned that love without respect is not really love at all, just manipulation wearing a prettier mask. The foundation has become my purpose in ways I never expected. Last month, we graduated our first class of students from the equine therapy program. 20 children who came to us angry and hurting and left with skills, confidence, and hope. I watched an 8-year-old girl who had not spoken in 2 years whisper to one of our therapy horses, watched her face light up with joy when the horse nuzzled her hand. That moment meant more to me than any business success, any racing championship, any amount of money ever could. We have expanded the educational programs too. Last spring, we hosted over 3,000 students from schools across Kentucky, giving them hands-on experience with horse care, teaching them about the economics of agriculture, showing them career paths they might never have considered. We have partnered with 3 universities to offer internships and research opportunities. We have created jobs for over 200 people, paying them fair wages and treating them with the dignity my mother always believed every worker deserved. The business side continues to exceed expectations. Our horses have won 4 major races this year. We have a waiting list of clients who want to breed with our stallions. We have expanded into 3 new states, but the success feels different now. It is not about proving anything or competing with anyone. It is about sustainability and legacy, about building something that will outlast me and serve a purpose beyond profit. I have also learned to forgive, though not in the way people might expect. I have not forgiven my father for what he did. I probably never will. His actions were deliberate and cruel, motivated by selfishness and ego. But I have forgiven myself for not seeing it sooner, for the years I wasted, trying to earn his approval, for the times I made excuses for his coldness toward my mother. I have forgiven myself for being human and imperfect, and trusting when I should have been more cautious. The legal battles are finally over. My father's appeals were all denied. He is serving his sentence at a minimum security federal prison in Pennsylvania. And I have not visited him, have not taken his calls, have not responded to his letters. Perhaps that makes me cold or unforgiving. But I have learned that forgiveness does not require continued relationship. I can release my anger without inviting him back into my life. I can wish him well in some abstract sense, without exposing myself to more pain. Some bridges once burned should stay that way. Sienna disappeared entirely from public life after her disastrous press conference. I heard through industry gossip that she tried to write a book about her experience, positioning herself as a victim of an older man's manipulation, but no publisher would touch it. I heard she attempted several business ventures that all failed. I heard she eventually moved to Los Angeles and married a producer twice her age, though whether she learned anything from her experience with my father, I sincerely doubt. Some people are incapable of growth or self-reflection. They move through life leaving destruction in their wake and never understanding their own role in the chaos. Marcus Thorne served 18 months in prison and was released last spring. He lost everything. His reputation, his career, his family, his wife divorced him. His adult children refused to speak to him. He lives in a small apartment somewhere in Ohio, working as a consultant for small businesses that do not know or do not care about his past. It is not the dramatic downfall I might have imagined, but it is a kind of justice. He has to live with the knowledge of what he lost and why he lost it, and that is its own punishment. The media attention has finally died down. For months, I could not leave the estate without being followed by photographers and reporters, all of them wanting quotes or reactions or inside information. But people's attention spans are short, and eventually a new scandal came along to capture the public imagination. Now I can go to the grocery store or the feed supply without being recognized, and that anonymity is a relief I did not know I needed. I have also built new relationships, healthier ones founded on mutual respect, rather than obligation or expectation. Jessica Riley became a genuine friend, someone I trust implicitly. She won a Pulitzer Prize for her investigative series on corporate corruption, using my father's case as the centerpiece of a larger story about unchecked executive power. We have dinner once a month, and she has become a kind of mentor, teaching me how to navigate media and public relations, how to tell my story in my own words, rather than letting others define the narrative. Caleb remains my right hand at the estate. I promoted him to Chief Operating Officer and gave him a substantial raise and a percentage of the business. He has earned it 1,000 times over, both for his decades of loyal service to my mother and for his unwavering support of me during the darkest period of my life. He is the grandfather I never had, and I am grateful every day for his wisdom and steadiness. I have even started dating again, though, cautiously. The experience with my father has made me wary of trusting people's motives, especially people who are interested in me now that I control a fortune. But there is a veterinarian who works with our horses, a kind and unpretentious man who knew nothing about my family drama when we met and seems genuinely uninterested in my money. We are taking things slowly, building something real rather than rushing into intensity and drama. My mother would have liked him, I think. He has her same quiet competence, her same dedication to doing things right rather than doing things quickly. I ride every morning now, just as my mother used to do. I take Windchaser 2, the grandson of my mother's first champion, and we ride through the hills that surround the estate, watching the sun come up over the bluegrass. Those mornings are sacred to me, a time when I feel closest to my mother, when I can hear her voice in my head giving me advice and encouragement. She would be proud of what I have built here, I know that with absolute certainty. Not just the financial success or the awards and recognition, but the meaning and purpose I have created from what could have been only bitterness and grief. The rose garden is in full bloom right now. We planted over 500 new bushes, all heritage varieties that my mother loved. The scent is overwhelming on warm afternoons, sweet and complex and alive. We installed benches throughout the garden, and there is always someone sitting there reading or thinking or just breathing in the beauty. That garden has become a kind of memorial, but not a sad one. It is a celebration of my mother's life and vision, a living testament to everything she valued. I think often about the woman I was 18 months ago, standing at my mother's funeral, watching my father give away her legacy, feeling powerless and small and utterly defeated. That woman would not recognize me now. I am harder in some ways, less willing to accept disrespect or mistreatment. I am softer in others, more open to genuine connection and vulnerability with people who have earned that trust. I am more certain of my own worth, less desperate for external validation. I am building a life on my own terms, according to my own values, and that freedom is intoxicating. The lawsuit settlements provided additional poetic justice. The board of Blackwood Industries, desperate to distance itself from my father's crimes and rebuild its reputation, agreed to donate $10 million to the Eleanor Sterling Foundation as part of a settlement agreement. That money has funded the expansion of our programs and allowed us to help exponentially more people. My father's corruption, his greed and ego, inadvertently created the resources to build something good and lasting. My mother would have appreciated that irony. I have also reclaimed spaces in my own mind that I did not realize had been occupied by my father's judgment and expectations. For years, I made decisions based on what he would think, what he would approve of, whether I was living up to his standards. Now I make decisions based on what I think is right, what aligns with my values, what serves the legacy my mother left me. That shift has been revolutionary. I am not living in reaction to anyone anymore. I am living according to my own vision, and the clarity that comes with that is profound. Sometimes I wonder what would have happened if I had not found that horseshoe, if my mother had not planned so carefully for my father's potential betrayal. Would I have fought back at all, or would I have accepted defeat and walked away from my inheritance, too broken and intimidated to challenge him? I like to think I would have found the strength eventually, but I am grateful I did not have to discover whether that is true. My mother gave me the tools I needed, exactly when I needed them, one final gift from beyond the grave. The estate hosts an annual gala now in my mother's honor. It has become one of the premier social events in Kentucky, drawing attendees from across the country. All proceeds go to the foundation, and last year we raised over $3 million in a single evening. I give a speech each year talking about my mother's vision and values, about the importance of building legacies rather than just accumulating wealth, about using privilege and resources to create opportunities for others. It has become my favorite night of the year, a chance to celebrate what we have built and to inspire others to think about their own legacies. I have learned that revenge is not about destruction. Real revenge, meaningful revenge, is about taking what someone tried to steal from you and building something so beautiful and significant that their attempted theft becomes irrelevant. My father tried to take Elysian Fields from me. Instead, I have transformed it into Sterling Legacy Farms, a place that serves thousands of people and animals, that creates opportunity and healing, that stands as a monument to my mother's values. That is the best revenge I could possibly have imagined. The wounds are healing slowly but surely. I still have days when I am angry, Days when I fantasize about confronting my father or Sienna, about making them truly understand the depth of the harm they caused. But those days are fewer now, and I have learned to sit with those feelings rather than acting on them. Anger is valid and useful when it motivates positive action, but it becomes toxic when it consumes you. I refuse to let my father's betrayal define the rest of my life. He gets no more of my time or energy than absolutely necessary. I am 25 years old now. I run a $5 billion estate, oversee a foundation that serves thousands, and employ hundreds of people whose livelihoods depend on my decisions. Some days that responsibility feels crushing, but most days it feels like purpose, like I am exactly where I am supposed to be doing exactly what I was meant to do. My mother prepared me for this whether I realized it at the time or not. Every lesson she taught me, every value she instilled, every moment we spent together was building toward this moment. The story of what happened has become something of a legend in business and legal circles. I am occasionally invited to speak at conferences or universities to share what I learned about standing up to corruption, about protecting legacies, about the intersection of family dynamics and business. I always accept these invitations because I know my story can help other people who feel powerless in the face of manipulation or betrayal. If my experience can give someone else the courage to fight back, to demand what is rightfully theirs, to refuse to be a victim, then everything I went through has additional meaning. My mother used to say that the measure of a person is not what they do when things are easy, but how they respond when everything falls apart. She said that character is revealed in crisis, that you do not know who you truly are until you have been tested. I have been tested in ways I never imagined, and I have discovered reserves of strength and determination I did not know I possessed. I have learned that I am my mother's daughter in the ways that matter most, not in genetics or inheritance, but in values and resilience and refusal to be broken by injustice. The transformation of Elysian Fields into Sterling Legacy Farms is not complete. It is an ongoing project, something I will work on for the rest of my life. But the foundation is solid, the vision is clear, and the purpose is unwavering. We are building something that will outlast all of us, something that will benefit generations of people and animals. That is the truest form of legacy, and it is exactly what my mother would have wanted. Looking back now, I can see that the day of my mother's funeral, the day my father betrayed everything we were supposed to be as a family, was not the end of my story. It was the beginning. It was the day I stopped being a passive participant in my own life and became the author of my own narrative. It was the day I learned that I could not control what others did to me, but I could absolutely control how I responded. And my response was to build something beautiful from the ashes of betrayal, to create meaning from pain, to transform victimhood into agency. I am not the same person I was 18 months ago. That young woman, the one who stood at her mother's grave and watched her father give away her inheritance, was still a girl in many ways. She was still seeking approval, still afraid of conflict, still unsure of her own power. The woman I am now knows her worth. She sets boundaries and enforces them. She makes decisions based on her own judgment rather than seeking constant validation. She has learned that being respected is more important than being liked, that protecting yourself is not selfish, and that sometimes the most loving thing you can do is walk away from people who refuse to treat you with dignity. So here is what I want you to understand from my story. If you are in a relationship where you are not valued, where you are taken for granted, where your sacrifices are expected rather than appreciated, you have the power to change that situation. It might be terrifying. It might mean facing conflict and disapproval and loss. But staying in a toxic situation is a slow death, a gradual erosion of everything that makes you who you are. You deserve better. You deserve respect and reciprocity and genuine love, not manipulation masquerading as affection. And if someone has betrayed you, if they have stolen from you or lied to you or tried to destroy what you have built, remember this. The best revenge is not matching their cruelty or descending to their level. The best revenge is building something so meaningful and beautiful that their attempted destruction becomes nothing more than a minor obstacle you overcame on the way to creating your legacy. Do not let their betrayal define you. Let your response define you. Let your resilience and your refusal to be broken be what people remember. Your worth is not determined by how others treat you. Your value is inherent and unchangeable. When someone fails to recognize that it is their failure, not yours, walk away from people who cannot or will not see your worth. Surround yourself with people who celebrate you rather than tolerate you. Build a life that reflects your values rather than trying to meet someone else's constantly shifting expectations. And never ever apologize for protecting yourself and your legacy from those who would exploit or destroy either one. Now, I want to hear from you. Have you ever had to fight back against someone you trusted? Have you had to walk away from a relationship or situation that was destroying you? What gave you the strength to do it? Drop your story in the comments below. Let us support each other because we all need to know we are not alone in these struggles. And if this story resonated with you, if it gave you hope or inspiration or just made you feel seen and understood, please hit that like button. Subscribe so you do not miss the next story. Because I have learned that all of our experiences, no matter how painful, connect us to each other and remind us of our shared humanity. Share this with someone who needs to hear it, someone who is struggling to find the courage to stand up for themselves. Your share might be exactly what they need to take that first brave step toward reclaiming their own power. Thank you for listening to my story. Thank you for being here. And remember, you are stronger than you think, braver than you believe, and worthy of so much more than settling for scraps of respect from people who should be honoring you. Build your legacy, protect what matters, and never let anyone convince you that their betrayal is somehow your fault. Until next time.